mortgages are probably the greatest wealth creator in the United States, bar none. Because you have the exceptional individuals like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos who can make billions and trillions of dollars and become wealthy that way, but they're the extreme rare individual. And then you have 300 million or more people in the United States, and the vast majority of us can buy a house with a mortgage. And owning a house, owning real estate is the single most indicator of your wealth creation as an average individual. In the United States, probably anywhere in the world. It's ownership of real estate. And we looked at a graph of that when we spoke at the UW soccer team. And we just looked at that the wealth creation for people who don't own real estate over decades-long periods was a complete flat line, very low near the x-axis. It just never rose above that x-axis. If you rent, all the time, that's where, and that's just statistics. That's not a value judgment. That's just statistics. Whereas those who own real estate go like this. And
so if there's something that can get you there, then
and so
it's definitely worth considering.
And with mortgage debt in particular, several things. The United States is unique in that it tax favors mortgage debt. The United States is unique. You talk about the American dream, and a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's the American dream, you own a house. And that's true, but that's a very truncated version of what the American dream, why that became known as the American dream. Because everybody kind of prior to that lives in some sort of quasi-feudal system where you were very much tied to the people who owned the land that you lived upon. So your whole life was dictated by those people. And the idea of home ownership being made available widely was really uniquely American. And it's not just the financial wealth that goes, or the freedom that goes along with owning your own real estate. And one of the ways that that over the years we've seen that commitment to home ownership that's embedded in American culture, in tax code, in different mortgage policies and programs that were enacted to give people access to home ownership. And it's been a vastly big success. You can look over decades and decades and decades, and you just see real estate go like that. Now you had that little blip, right? You had that blip in 2007 to 2010, say, and that was very painful for a number of people. So, not meaning to minimize that. But the other thing to keep in mind is it's not just that everyone who owned real estate during that blip really suffered. I owned this house during that blip. By the grace of God, I was able to make my mortgage payment. The value went way down, and I could have been underwater. Who knows? But I didn't pay attention to that because I was still living here. I was still making my mortgage payment, and it recovered enormously.
Right. So the only people that really hurt were if you had to sell during that time for whatever reason.
Well, and not just if you had to sell. I mean, that's this gets kind of way beyond the scope of this, but there were a lot of people who strategically defaulted.
Right.
And those were people who could make their payments, like me, and they just said, "Look, my house is upside down. It's worth less than the bank. I owe the bank on it, so I'm just going to walk away from it and let the bank deal with it." And so, but yes, those people who were forced, their jobs were impacted. There were a lot of people like that. Their jobs were impacted, and they had to walk away from how they just couldn't physically make the payment, and that's a painful time. So back to the original point, though, low interest rates. You have a low interest rate, and it's tax deductible. For most people, this mortgage interest deduction, interest rate is tax deductible.
Can you quantify that? Like, in my mind, I've always worked in taxes are small numbers for me. So, what could that look like for an average, Seattle area average homeowner is $500,000, average first-time home buyer, something like that. Average homeowners, I don't know, what is that, $900,000?
Let's just say right now, times, let's say 0.065 is $32,000. So let's say you have $32,000 a year in interest.
Okay.
And then you have $4,000 on top of that in real estate taxes. That becomes deductible. So now you're up to $37,000 of deductions. Now, people, we don't get too much in the weeds. People, but I do want to acknowledge people have a standard deduction that's pretty substantial.
Yeah.
But if you're doing charitable contributions, you're doing other things on top of that right now you don't really get to use because they're below the standard. Then you start adding $40,000 worth of housing related cost to that. Now you've got a very substantial tax deduction that lowers your taxable income by $30,000, and if you're in the marginal tax rate of 20%, that's $6,000. So it's tax deductible. Typically, they're lower interest rates on because they're secured. Mortgages are secured by real property. It's different than a credit card. When you're buying shoes on your credit card, then that's not secured by anything.
Right.
That's just your promise to repay. They have a much higher default rate. The interest rates are a lot higher. They're variable. These are typically fixed. It's levered investing. With a mortgage, you are investing in an asset, but you're only putting a small percent down on a much larger asset. So, with housing, you can put 20% down. You can put 3% down. If you're a VA, if you're a veteran, you can put 0% down. I'm not necessarily advocating for any of those, and the lower you put down, the more risk you have.
Yeah.
But it's a levered investment. Most of us, just normal individuals, average individuals, don't have access to levered investing, where you're investing $50,000 in a $500,000 asset, and so you've only invested $50,000. If that $500,000 asset grows by 5% every year, which is pretty historically average, 4.5% average over the last 4 or 5 decades, real estate, and as investment advisors are always, kind of have to disclaim, past performance is no guarantee of future results. And that's true with real estate as with anything, but historically it's 4 to 5% with very few exceptions over the years. There may be some exceptions, but very few exceptions if you just average it over a long period of time. And that's let's say it's 5, just to use a round number, that's a $25,000 return in 1 year on a $50,000 investment. Yeah. Now you have to pay interest expense and all that to offset that, but that's tax deductible, remember? And so it's an enormously favorable investment, and so mortgages give you access to that. And I started out when when Mom and I started out, looking to buy a house. I mean, our ideal was no debt. Let's buy it. And this was, mind you, when houses were $77,000. Our first house we bought was $77,000. But even then, it was way beyond our means to save that much money. And every year we would have waited on that, prices would have accelerated, and you just so it's a way to invest. It's a levered investment. It's secured by an asset, and it's a non-depreciating asset. It's like when you finance a car, and I'm not, cars are kind of in the middle. Credit cards, to me, credit cards are like the worst type of debt, and you should be, really normally if you're just building up, a lot of times when you're building up credit card debt, it's because you're living beyond your means, right? And I don't want to make that as a universal judgment. There's all kinds of reasons for people, but a lot of times people are just spending more than they're able to pay for every month, and they're buying consumables, vacations, TVs, clothing, whatever. They're buying these consumables that don't last. And they're not paying for them. They're going to pay for them at a later date. And there's and so that's very bad debt. But this is secured by the land. So that's the other thing about mortgage. Yes, it's a risk. Values can go down, but it's not something like a car. If you finance a car, if you finance over too long of a period of time, that is a depreciating asset. Right. That car is not going to last forever. And it's going to become unreliable at some point. And so you want to. If you're going to finance a car, you're going to want to pay that off for a relatively short period of time. But a mortgage, you're on a piece of dirt, you're on land. It is going to last forever in a sense. It's going to be around for a very long time. It's not, and typically it's an appreciating asset, and it increases your net worth. The other thing about mortgage debt is it's not like you are consuming something that you otherwise couldn't afford. It's you're paying an unavoidable cost in a mortgage. You're going to pay someone for housing. you have to live somewhere,
Right.
and
Yeah,
you're going
yeah,
to pay someone for housing.
Yeah.
And so, or you're going to pay a landlord
Yeah.
for housing. So it's not like
You can
mortgage. You're
quantify
saying,
the
hey,
comparison.
it would be nice to have a mortgage. I'm going to go. It'd be nice to have a house,
Yeah.
and it's an expense that you otherwise aren't paying. No, you're paying something. You're paying rent. You're paying.
Mhm.
And especially as you get older and you have a family, that cost grows. And so the other thing about a mortgage is you're fixing that cost in.